I've been a huge fan of Star Trek for years. Is The Witch's Hat too much? I think The Witch's Hat is too much. And that's why in preparation for Halloween this year, I decided that I was going to look at some of the Halloweeniest episodes of Star Trek. These are the top 10 episodes of Star Trek that most put me in the mood for Halloween. At number 10, The Man Trap. Now, this is the very first episode of Star Trek to ever air on television. I actually got into Star Trek at first when I went to see like an exhibit of a bunch of old props and like costumes, and the costume of the monster for this one, whoa, it's so intricate and detailed, especially for the fact that it only appears in like, I don't know, 2 shots of the episode. They put a lot of effort into this costume. Now, the only reason this episode is so low down, because it is a phenomenal episode, is that it's not very Halloween-y. It's certainly not as Halloween-esque as I remember it being. But, I mean, looking at that monster at the end, it leaves an impression. At number 9, the Deep Space Nine episode Empok Nor. Now, a desolate, lifeless copy of the Deep Space Nine space station is creepy enough anyway, but add in the claustrophobic way that this is shot using crates and a whole manner of like walls and stuff in the foreground to really just make everything feel closed in, plus the darkness. There is some real like claustrophobic horror here. And then also, this episode really ups its stakes about halfway through. The beginning premise where they're going to this abandoned station that's an exact replica of Deep Space Nine to get some repair supplies, but when they get there, there are some Cardassian like Navy SEAL types that are activated out of cryo freeze. That's pretty scary, especially as they're going through and taking out some of the Starfleet people. But when it gets even creepier, and I guess this is a spoiler for the episode, so if you don't want that, like skip ahead like 10-20 seconds. But it gets really creepy when Garrick starts to be influenced by the, I forget what it was called, but when Garrick starts to be influenced and starts turning against the crew, you watch him effortlessly take out these other 2 Cardassians that have been giving us trouble, and then it's just a game of cat and mouse between him and Chief O'Brien. Oh, it's a fun one. Psychologically fun. Coming in at number 8, the Next Generation episode Schisms. Now, this one honestly took me a little while to get into. It kind of starts off pretty generic, and it takes a little bit for like the threat of the episode to like present itself. Everything's just kind of like milling about for a bit, but once it starts, oof, the eerie factor really creeps in, and all of the little snidbits that we'd seen before start to really pay off. The scene in the holodeck is kind of chilling as they're recreating something that's dormant in a lot of their memories. There's some great performances by Jonathan Frakes. It's really just like unsettling in like the alien abduction kind of way, with like a hint of body horror if you really think about some of the things that are said for a little bit. And this one ends kind of unresolved with the threat still out there in the galaxy, ready to wreak havoc again. Coming in at number 7 is our next Deep Space Nine episode, Whispers. This one is all kinds of psychologically creepy. We follow along the protagonist of the episode, O'Brien, as suddenly everyone on the station starts slowly acting bizarre. There's a few hints early on, and then it gets deeper and deeper into full-on conspiracy theory, and I don't want to spoil the end of the episode, but everything pays off at the end, and it really gets you thinking about, just some stuff that I don't want to think about in terms of if the implications of if this could really be a thing in real life. At number 6, we have Voyager, the Meld. This one is very Silence of the Lamb-esque, as there is a killer on Voyager, and Tuvok is determined, even once they find the killer, to figure out the motive. There's a lot of scenes between Tuvok and the killer in the brig. Throughout all of these scenes and the whole episode, there are chilling performances by Tim Russ and guest star Brad Dourif. I can't recommend this episode enough. It's one that I go back to and watch frequently, but definitely has heavy Halloween vibes. So I originally filmed this video a year ago, but never got around to finishing editing it, and now, looking back on it, I have to make an addition. With the release of Strange New Worlds, we have number 5, Strange New Worlds, episode 9, All Those Who Wander. This is why you never split the party. With Captain Pike and some of his crew down on a desolate planet that blocks all communication, the Enterprise is off and away doing another rescue mission, so they can't even leave on their shuttlecraft to go and get help. No, they are trapped on this ice planet with filmmaking and story beats taken from both Alien and Predator, though thankfully not Alien vs. Predator. This episode makes the Gorn scarier than they ever have been before, and a truly formidable threat. The survival and chase scenes of this episode were thrilling and exciting and tense, though once the crew did eventually come up with a plan, it was a little too easily successful for my personal dramatic taste. That's not to say that there aren't lasting consequences from this episode, though, because it's rare for an episode of Star Trek to kill off a main character. The final speech given by Celia Rose Gooding playing Cadet Uhura at the end, I tear up every time that I hear it. The hat goes back on for this one. At number 4, we have Catspaw from the original series, and this one is, without a doubt, the corniest, the kookiest, the silliest episode on this list. They really and truly made this episode specifically to be a Halloween special, and they're not even a tiny bit subtle about it. They've got the witches from Macbeth, they've got black cats, but like space black cats. Jack, it's a shame I didn't have you last year. Oh, I don't have you now either. They've got voodoo stuff. They mention trick-or-treating like 3 or 4 times, and of course McCoy and Kirk are like, Spock, you don't know what trick-or-treating is? Is this episode good? No. It's a bad episode of the original series, but it's so bad that it's good. If you go into this expecting just silliness and you just want to watch and like laugh at the ridiculousness and get some heavy Halloween vibes, it can totally work for you. Not gonna lie, when I first started putting this list together, I put this one like way at the bottom, or I was even like gonna make it an honorable mention. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know, it has to go up higher on the list. Not because it's good, but because of how ridiculously and unapologetically Halloween it is. Now, while this one may be the most Halloween, obviously, episode of Star Trek, the top 3 I felt really got me in like the spooky vibe as I was watching all of them throughout the month. Coming in at number 3 is The Haunting of Deck 12 from Voyager. This episode is framed as a ghost story being told around a campfire. Not literally a campfire, but that aesthetic, where there's a power failure throughout Voyager, and Neelix has to keep the children entertained. So he tells them about an event from a couple months ago that may or may not be related to the power outage that they're suffering now. It leads to a creative way to tell a spooky story in Star Trek, as because it's Neelix telling the story, you almost have an unreliable narrator. There are parts in the story that even some of the children point out, like he's saying the technical details wrong, but we're hearing like the actual characters say those technical details. It's never like Neelix narrating over the whole entire thing. There are snippets. Because we know for a fact that there are details of this story that we are seeing wrong, you can kind of exaggerate some of the fears and interactions and pacing of the episode to just say, hey, this is not meant to 100% be accurately what happened. It's supposed to be the most dramatic, scary, spooky, let me tell you about this story that once happened on this ship kind of way. So it ends up being a lot of fun. And it's a good episode of Star Trek too. While there are some episodes of Voyager that make me really go, God, why is Neelix a character? This is one of the ones that reminds me why he's on the show. At number 2, we have the only episode of Enterprise that made it onto the list, Impulse. Now, why did it make it onto the list? And why is it so high? 2 words. Zombie Vulcans. I mean, that's just such a fun concept in general. It is executed really well. It's a great zombie story. There's superb acting, especially from Jolene Baylock, who plays T'Pol. It's a phenomenal episode. Great action set pieces, great pacing. Mostly the B plot with like the shuttle going and landing and getting some supplies on an asteroid, it wasn't entirely needed, but overall this is a great episode of Enterprise and a really spooky zombie story. The lighting and shadow work in this episode also are just really good, with the exception of one scene where they were doing some flashes that was definitely a little too much. But overall, this episode doesn't hit a 100% of everything that it tries to do, but it probably hits a solid like 95%. And the 95% that it does hit, it hits right out of the park. Before we get to number 1, I wanted to pop in real quick and give 2 honorable mentions. The first goes to the Voyager episode Thaw. For anyone who finds circuses and clowns to be creepy, be warned, this episode leans heavily into this with a reality-altering clown in a circus of terror that represents the epitomization of fear. And the second honorable mention goes to the Next Generation episode Identity Crisis. This episode truly has the crew of the Enterprise face off against the unknown. And the unknown can be quite scary. This is a Geordi-focused episode where all of the members of an away team that he was part of years ago begin to go missing one by one, and it's up to him and the only other remaining person from that away team to figure out why before they're next. While the unknown can be scary, the known, not so much, and this episode does put all of the cards out on the table a bit before the end. De-escalates a lot of the tension for me because once the guest character is saved, but with that out of the way, that brings us to our number 1 episode. Take it away, Past Josh. So now, top of the list, coming in at number 1 is from the Next Generation, Night Terrors. Whew, I was so glad that I watched this episode in the morning, because I think if I watched it at night, it would give me night terrors. The whole ensemble has fantastic performances here, and as there are, I don't want to give away too much of what happens in the episode. The plot of the episode follows the Enterprise investigating the disappearance of the USS Britannia. From the opening seconds of the episode, there is a creepy atmospheric score that really tells you, like, you're in for a ride. They get there, they see the Britannia, there are no responses to hails, there's erratic life signs that can't fully be read, and Troy senses something off. The crew goes to investigate, they find only one survivor, and every other member of the crew dead, with the only cause being that they killed each other. What could drive a Starfleet crew to do this? And are similar things beginning to slowly take place on the Enterprise? It's a chilling episode with some great dream sequences from Troy that I remembered, like this scene in her nightmare, but when I saw that it was in this episode, I was like, oh, I'm really truly getting a full-on treat here. This, in my opinion, is the best episode of Star Trek to watch to get yourself into the Halloween spirit. I watched it twice because I was like, this is really good. And then I showed it to my girlfriend, who I'm showing just Star Trek in general for the first time, and I was like, Halloween episode. And she's a big fan of Halloween, so she was like, Halloween episode? I was like, yeah. And we had a good time watching it. Even though I'd just seen it like a couple days before, I still had a good time watching it again. I, again, don't want to give away too much, but like every scene is just like really good. The entire ensemble is on their game, and that's what I think Star Trek does best, especially in these Halloween episodes. I've found that the more ensemble ones really get you going. Though there were also some intense focus ones, like the O'Brien one. But yeah, that's it for me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. What are some of your favorite Star Trek episodes to get in the mood for Halloween? Or if you haven't done that before, and you want to check some of these out, let me know how it goes for you. So subscribe if you want to see more. And as always, have a good week.